All right, hello guys, Hut here. Just thought I'd make a quick video. We've seen a lot of guys talking about Age of Siege. Stuff needs to be nerfed. Like towers are really strong, walls are really strong, siege is really strong. So I thought I'd just make a quick video, giving my thoughts and opinions on the state of the game at the moment with regards to those couple of things. And then I've got a little general balance change I would like to see implemented at the end. But we'll just quickly go through a couple of notes that I think are quite reasonable, and just generate a bit of discussion around them, I suppose. So I would start by nerfing walls. I think a lot of the problem with the game at the moment is once both players end up walling the left and right flank of whatever map they're on, you can have a look at the Beastie versus Viper game from Golden League this past weekend, the French versus England game, I believe it was. Both players just stonewalled both sides, and then all of the action is down the middle. I think it is too difficult to break walls at the moment. Like the amount of attention and time it takes to break a wall segment, it's sort of just not worth it. Yeah, like I think wall HP is like just a bit of an issue, especially stone walls. So these are just some of the changes I would make. So I would nerf Palisade HP from 1500 to 1000. The Roost Fortified Palisade would go from 3000 to 2000, and the Stone Wall would go from 3500 to 2000. So this allows you more room for counterplay, breaking through walls. Just by lowering the HP, I would like stone walls. They're always going to be non-torchable. That's never going to change, which I think is good overall. But I think this HP nerf would make it a little bit easier for people who actually want to try and get through stone walls. It's a bit easier to do so. I would also make it so stone wall foundations can also be torched. So no more of this like you just quick wall and you like do one tap on a segment, and then infantry or whatever that is like standing right there can't do anything. Unless the stone wall is completely built, the foundations can be torched, and they would also take the bonus 50% damage that was introduced in the recent patch. So I think that would help a lot with, like you've caught them out essentially, but you just don't get denied by one villager's just smashing their hammer once on the ground. So I think this allows a bit more opportunity for counterplay. And now this is like something I've thought about for a while, and I'm actually interested to hear people's opinions and thoughts on this particular change. So destroyed stone wall segments. Now, I guess this would count for any wall, by the way, but destroyed wall segments also destroy the two adjacent segments. So if you've got a bombard shooting a stone wall, and you shoot like the middle bit of the wall, the two adjacent segments of that wall are also destroyed. So instead of having a one tile like pathway you've just opened, you've got a 3 tile pathway. I think this will help a lot with just like the stalemates where you see like, especially with like some China games or whatever it is, because the walls are so strong currently, you punch a hole in the wall and then immediately a vill just like remakes a segment. So at least if they've got 3 segments to remake, it's a little bit more unforgiving, I guess, on the defensive. And I suppose a byproduct of this would be if they're re-walling that, if you target the 2 outside segments, they would also destroy the next adjacent walls. So the gap would, in theory, keep getting bigger. So I think this would really help with like basically limiting Age of Siege, because I think late game it just bogs down into like Outpost Siege spam because you can't do anything with mobility. Mobility becomes more or less worthless in late game situations because everything is just walled off. There's just towers spotting everything. So I think like a change like this would be quite interesting and probably healthy for the game. I would nerf the normal attack of Bombard, so I wouldn't touch the bonus damage or anything. This is basically, obviously it's a nerf to the unit in general, just being good versus a bunch of stuff. But because of the wall nerfs, this would also mean that they 5-shot walls now, which comes down from 8. And this is not including chemistry or anything because I didn't look into it that much, to be honest. But maybe it's like 4 shots if you get chemistry or something like that. But yeah, it's sort of just a byproduct of the wall nerfs. We can also nerf Bombard a little bit with that. I'm not like super keen on like Bombard nerf or whatever. It's just like a sort of a byproduct. So give or take on that one. So the actual issue with Siege, I think, is just purely because mangonels and nested bees don't have enough minimum range. I believe it's only 1 tile. I could be wrong. But it feels like if you ever actually gap close on top of a lot of mangonels, the rest of them just sort of turn and you're completely clumped on one trying to torch it down, and they all just fire and just whatever you got on top of them, horsemen, infantry, whatever, it just melts. So I think by adding an extra minimum range on top of the 1 I believe they already have, I think this would go a long way into just like providing ample counterplay with the units that are intended to counter siege. That's not just a Springold or a Culverin. Like, I honestly feel like if horsemen or infantry manage to get on top of your siege, it should die. Like, there's so many instances I've seen where, again, like you get on top of like Springolds or Trebs, Bombards, whatever, and then Mangonels that are like right next to you, and also because of the tracking projectiles, like the minimum range I think is just the biggest issue. Like your army just evaporates because they're all clumped up again on whatever you're trying to torch down as quick as you can. Like it feels like when you fight into siege, it's honestly like the biggest bait ever. It's to just have like your Bombard or something out front and you're just hoping they torch it, and then your Mangonels can just destroy everything. But yeah, I think just adding an extra minimum range onto them would be, let's just say, very useful, because again, I don't see why stuff like horsemen getting on top of siege shouldn't just melt them incredibly quickly. And I think the way the Mangonel and Nestor B is at the moment is a little bit too forgiving. So I think an addition of minimum range, and by the way, this is like really the only thing I would change about siege. I think the whole counter system of, you know, you need to go Springolds, you need to have a mass Springolds before you can go Mangonels, or you want to have Culverins to like force them off springs or whatever. Like there's a couple of ways you can go about nerfing siege, but I think this is probably the most straightforward and like the most fair, I guess. Yeah, I feel like this is like, I'm pretty set in stone on this change, honestly. I don't see why it would be a bad change overall, but yeah, this is like the one I would push for most heavily. So let me know your guys' thoughts on that one. So next thing I would also look at doing, I would add a RAM upgrade, so like a unit upgrade to the Siege Works. You can look at giving more HP, more armor, and potentially splash damage. So in AoE 2, you've got the Captain Siege Ram. They both do splash damage. So if you've got like a palisade wall, it'll be a little bit different in Age 4 because you can't like stack walls the way you could in AoE 2. But say you had like 2 or 3 layers of like palisade or stone wall, the Captain Siege Ram would do AoE damage to, I think like the Siege Ram did like 3 tiles worth of AoE to the front and to the sides. So I think something like that would also help with breaking walls. And I said change geometry or have a Siege Ram tech. Like either you have, again, like you just make a new technology called Siege Ram and I don't know, load it up with like this stuff, or you can maybe add it to geometry, which was recently moved to the Siege Works. So I mean, either way, because I think like Rams are just like completely worthless because Springolds are just like too good versus them. I wouldn't even be opposed to like Rams just having a ton of armor. Like give them 100 armor or something, or 200 armor. So they must be killed with melee units. Because they said, or the dev said, I think 2 months ago now, and this is actually a reason why they changed the RAM initially when they lowered the HP, but they gave them more armor. But the thing was, because arrows do a minimum of 1 damage, especially if that's England, it was actually like a bit of a nerf. But Springolds are just like too dominant in the meta for Rams to ever really have a place. Whereas I think like Rams, in theory, should be quite a good unit to have. And like obviously you can spread them out. You can have them hitting like, you know, a left-hand side flank, like they can be clearing walls there. They can be clearing towers on like another side, but like they're only really good at killing, like they only kill one segment of whatever they're doing. Like they can hit like a palisade wall and then they hit like the one segment of a stone wall, but like it is not impactful at all. Like it takes way too long to clear anything like that. Whereas I think like if you actually give the siege, or if you made a tech called siege ram and you gave it a bit more utility, you would have again a lot more counterplay on walls because we would nerf the HP, and just make them more useful in general versus buildings. So the next change I would look at doing is actually just giving infantry a torch damage buff. I would just give them straight up plus 20, which is the same that horsemen get now. Horsemen were recently buffed in the last patch with their torch damage, and I honestly don't know why. If infantry gets on top of siege, it shouldn't just die the same as horsemen getting on top of siege, because it's a lot harder for infantry to get on top of siege because it's slower. Like crossbows pretty much like murder man-at-arms, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Yeah, I honestly just think if you can actually get on top of siege, it should melt, which lays into the next change I would look at doing, nerfing the siege repair rate of villages. So you've got like one mangonel out and it's just surrounded by vills and you can torch it, and if you don't have enough to one-shot it, it just goes straight back to full HP. Maybe with like this change it would be a bit redundant, but I don't know. I feel like if you just have like a vill chasing around like a bunch of your siege, like you see like Leonok is really good at this, BC is really good at this. They'll have like their siege mass and they'll just have like a ton of vills just with it. And if you ever try and take a fight and you don't one-shot whatever you're targeting, like they just have vills right there and it just heal back up to full. And you feel stupid even like trying to fight into that. So I think like a nerf on the rate at which siege is repaired would be common sense. So I'm going to talk about some outpost nerfs now. This might be a bit controversial. I don't know if this is like the right way to nerf them, but these are just my thoughts. So the spring hold placement, I would take away 1 range. I would give it 2 minimum range, and then maybe increase the cost by 25 stone. So if we lose 1 range, the spring hold placement no longer has the same range as a mangonel. So mangonels are now able to clear spring hold placement towers. If you have 2 minimum range, and by the way, we're not giving minimum range to arrow slit towers or anything. It would only be for spring hold and cannon emplacement ones because it makes sense. A dude with a bow could, in theory, you know, jump out the window and shoot down. Spring hold or a cannon can't really get that level of elevation in the tower if you're thinking logically about it, which you should never do. But having a 2 minimum range, it's sort of saying, if I've got a bunch of infantry, yes, this might suck. I run into the tower and I'm taking damage, but at least once I'm under it, I can actually clear this. Because I think tower spam is just way too oppressive at the moment, and the only good way of dealing with it is to have siege. Like, you need to have a ram very slowly and very methodically, like going around clearing tower after tower, or you need to be attentive with like a treb or something to like, because most of the time like an outpost is in a stealth forest, so you must target like attack ground with a treb or whatever, and then you have to move the treb to the next one and so on and so forth. Like, it's just very tedious to actually clear outposts. So I think like a addition of minimum range on the spring hold and cannon emplacement towers would be quite beneficial for infantry actually just running into a tower and clearing it. So cannon emplacement, again, -1 range, 2 minimum range, and maybe less AoE on the cannonball. The significance of the -1 range is that bombards would now outrange them. And the thing is, I don't think these values should actually apply to... I don't think these should apply to the ones added to a keep, because I think keeps are a bit shit, to be honest, in terms of damage. But I don't know, maybe that's like too inconsistent for RTS, like for an RTS game. But I mean, like, we have massive inconsistency of like, how do we nerf Mongol TC Rush? Oh, you just can't put your TC within like 20 tiles of the opponent's main TC. Unlucky. So, I don't know. But I feel like this is like an interesting way of nerfing these two. With the addition of the minimum range on the cannon towers, again, it's the same sort of thing. This might suck running into it, but once I'm actually underneath the tower, I can clear it. Something to think about. So I'd also nerf the Fortify Outpost technology to just not give it +5 fire armor. So you would still get 1000 HP, which is like a lot. But this would also mean infantry or cavalry can actually clear it, because once it's sort of got this, and again, you can just get this in Feudal Age, which means they have to get Ram, or they have to wait until Castle and get Trebs or whatever to actually clear it, which is a bit crazy to me. Because, like, again, Tower and Outpost spam is just incredibly strong and incredibly oppressive when used correctly. So, yeah. Just giving infantry more, and cavalry to the same extent, just giving them more opportunity to clear towers without having to get siege, I think is beneficial for the game. And this also just helps with like the late game, like standoff stuff, again with the -1 range and things like this. Because like if you see like Mongols play late game, it's literally just cannon emplacements everywhere. You can't really use bombards because if you're not paying attention, if you run into like 2 towers that are next to each other, like they just one-shot the bombard or whatever. Like it's very insane to deal with. It's very insane. Obviously with Trebs now being a bit better, like you can clear it and it's not as bad, but I don't think like a defensive emplacement should outrange the supposed counter units available in each age. It's like, again, a Mangonel can clear Springald emplacements with this change in Castle, and Bombards can clear cannon emplacements in Imp. The Roos Wooden Fortress would no longer gain extra range on the Springald emplacement when upgrading Arrow Slit, so their Springald emplacement goes up to 9 or 10 range. I think it's 10 range. When you get the Arrow Slit upgrade with Springald emplacement, that's a bit silly, and it also breaks like what we're trying to do here. So something to think about. So the other thing with mid-late game is, I think like keeps are in a weird spot. So the Chinese keep is like absolutely cracked. Like it does 50 times 3 damage, obviously a lot slower than a normal keep, but because like it does such a high damage value, armor is like less impactful. So man-at-arms, knights, whatever, they can sort of actually fight into keeps in Castle Age, obviously without boiling oil, but you absolutely cannot run under a Chinese keep because it just does way too much damage. So these are just like me spitballing a couple of changes for the keep, by the way. I'm not set on any of these ones, but I would move boiling oil to Imp, so you can actually like have an opportunity of fighting under a keep with mass ram if you really wanted to. And I would buff the keep damage, so make it higher base damage, less attack speed. So give it something like a crossbow attack and make it do like 25 times 3 damage at like half the speed of the Chinese keep, which I think is 3 seconds every attack. So 25 times 3 every 1.5 seconds or something like that. Just make it a little bit more on par. It wouldn't be as good as Chinese keeps, but I think like keeps defensively are just like really bad. Like they're actually really bad unless the units tend to run under the influence of boiling oil. They just don't do anything. Like late game horseman like raids, they just ignore keeps. Like it's literally pathetic. Like the easiest way of defending your eco is just to wall. Like that's why everyone walls so much, because keeps don't do anything defensively for you really. Like they're great at like holding position in the middle of the map when you're like having treb wars or whatever. Like they're fine for that, because they can dissuade Springalds like coming forward and whatever else. But I think the keep should be more like, it should have more utility defensively, especially like at home in your eco. Like if you're trying to defend against, again, like horseman raids or knight raids, or like even like English man-at-arm raids. Like have you ever played against like 10 ranged armor man-at-arm raids and you've just got like a keep in your eco? Like it's doing nothing. It's healing them, dude. It's like they have the Delhi Scholars like healing the man-at-arms as they're running into your eco. It's like cracked. Something like a change like this to just adjust the damage values of the keep would be I don't know, quite good, especially because we would move boiling oil to Imperial. So this change is basically to imply you can attack into keeps more in Castle if you want to, with like rams and stuff. And this would make keeps better defensively, but also obviously offensively if you get a good one up. But yeah, like keeps are just like underutilized a lot in comparison to towers, because towers just do more damage and they're like way cheaper. So I think this is like a good change to adjust that imbalance a little bit. And this is just like my general like buff suggestion. Can we please buff man-at-arm damage? Because if you haven't looked at like the stats of like a spearman, and yes, like man-at-arms have more armor and everything, whatever, go look at just like the damage that a spearman does compared to a man-at-arms. It's actually pathetic how bad man-at-arms actually are. So I'd suggest just giving them a buff of +2, +3, and +4 in feudal, castle, and imp age. So nothing for the Vanguard man-at-arms, obviously, for England, because I think they're probably okay at the moment. You've seen like the Drush build a couple of people have been doing. You don't want to overtune that so much, but at the moment, man-at-arms max out at 20 damage in Castle Age if they're just generic and don't have any extra Civ-specific bonuses. 20 damage, that's it. So it becomes like a thing where crossbow and like spearmen, like it just destroys every comp in the game. Like that's why I think it's so much of a siege fest in mid game, is because like what can you make? Like spearman crossbow counters knights, it counters man at arms. The only thing you can really make against it is siege. So I think that's why the game sort of like stalemates down a little bit. And I think if man at arms, like maybe I'm wrong, but like I just want to imagine a world where you can go man at arm archer and you can actually just like clear through the spearmen really quickly because you get the bonus damage from the archers against the spears, and the man at arms would have a fair bit more damage. So like if you consider if we give them +3 in Castle Age, they would go from 14 damage to 17, and that's not including the 2 attack upgrade bonuses you can get at the blacksmith. So 19 damage. I don't know. I just want a world where I can break through crossbow spear with man at arm archer. Maybe it's not meant to be, but I don't know. These are my thoughts on man at arms. And then you give a lesser bonus to Palace Guard because Palace Guard are actually useful because they're quick. So yeah, let me know your guys' thoughts on my bit of a ramble. Again, I think like the wall nerf with HP and then destroying the adjacent segments, like that might just be enough in general to overcome Age of Siege and allowing more opportunities for counterattacking, and not just 2 players walling 2 sides of the map and then no one can make any plays there because the time investment is way too big to 1, crack a hole, and 2, get enough units through before they can react, because like they just move their army when they see you're trying to break their wall. I think it'd be cool if like the wall is there to provide you like a warning signal that, hey, like I'm coming through here. Not, oh, I've got a wall. Yeah, it's going to take you a minute to break this. It should be like really quick to break through walls if they're undefended or they're not in position. So, yeah, I think, like I said, I think these changes in particular would fix a lot of the problems with the current state of Age of Siege or whatever, Age of Walls. And then this one would be the next biggest one that I would look at implementing with the minimum range. Because otherwise, again, I think the Siege, I think just Siege playstyle and the Siege units are like fine. They interact well with each other. It's just, I think the Mangonel is a little bit too strong. And I think this is a reasonable nerf without getting into like, should they do friendly fire? Should they continue to do tracking? All that stuff. I think those are design decisions which are fine for the game and probably good for the game. But I think just something like the 1 minimum range on these 2 units would go a long way to, making it not be as oppressive as it is currently. So yeah, like I said, let me know your guys' thoughts on my ramble, and I'll see you guys next time.